Hey everyone, Drew Murray from D20 Advice here. I'm a little out of breath because I've just run up the stairs. I started recording and then stopped and went to go and get props and books and things. Whew! Right. Let's catch my breath, you big, fat, unhealthy bastard. So, yes, I am fat. I currently have a packet of Oreos next to my desk. I am incredibly unhealthy, and that is something that I need to rectify. I'm currently struggling up the willpower to cut all biscuits and cakes out of my life. But that's not the problem. It's going back for that third cheese sandwich, that's what does it. Also, not exercising since my back got stolen. But, anyway. Whew. I get to sit down on my lard arse and just talk to a computer for a little bit, drinking tea out of my oversized novelty mug, which I got on my honeymoon at Alton Towers. Yeah. You can hear the clogged arteries churning. Anyway, I want to talk to you a bit about what I talked about in my last video, which was I am going to take this opportunity to just rant and do my own thing rather than producing content that I think fits in more with the YouTube landscape of gaming channels that I'm subscribed to. I'm not subscribed to anyone that says the things that I want to say, so I'm gonna say them rather than just think, maybe there isn't a market for it or anything. I no longer care about a market. There are so many times that I try to describe the same concept to people so many times that I'm just going to usurp my D20 advice thing that I was thinking of starting up as a business. I'm now putting that on the back burner, and I'm now going to use this as an opportunity for me to be able to go, hey, that thing that you asked me to elaborate on, video. And that way I get to explain it once. And if they then have questions, I get to explain it some more in detail because I like talking. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, 2nd edition, Player's Handbook. Don't know why I did it like that, but that artwork, man. This is the first Player's Handbook I ever handled. It was good times. It was good times. I think 3rd edition was already out. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons late. What I considered late, anyway. Especially for my family. But anyway, that's a story for another video. So Dungeons and Dragons. Wizards. Wizard spellbooks. Wizard spellbooks are just books. Let's have a look at the 3rd edition Player's Handbook and see what that says about wizard books. Because, essentially, wizard books are an open and shut thing. It's a book that you write spells in, right? Let's have a look here. Game rule, information, class features, spells. A wizard must prepare spells ahead of time by getting a good night's sleep and spending 1 hour studying her spell book. While studying, they decide what spells to prepare. Blah, 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 blah. Like bards and sorcerers, wizards may know any number of spells. Spell books. They must study their spell books each day to prepare their spells. See Preparing Wizard Spells, page 154. A wizard cannot prepare any spell not recorded in her spell book, except for Read Magic, which all can prepare from memory. Recorded in the spell book. So yeah, that's it on spell books in the wizard class section. And it said page 154. So let's just skip ahead to page 154. I'm getting to a point. I have a point to make. This is the preamble, and what I should have done is preface what the whole thing is. Basically, I will do that now. Spellbooks are not the only thing that you can use for wizards. It is the abstract of what I'm going to say in this video. Basically, wizards can use anything you can imagine as a spell book. It doesn't need to be a book. And I'm going to prove through this video that was the case, and that case has been forgotten by pretty much everyone. And I'm going to go into why that's a bit sad. So, page 154, preparing wizard spells. Let's see, is there a specific spell book section? Arcane magical writings, wizard spells and borrowed books, adding to a wizard spell book, writing to a new spell book. Okay, so let's... Preparing wizard spells, rest, preparation environment. Okay, this might be important. So in 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, wizards must have enough peace, quiet and comfort to allow for proper concentration. Spells need not be luxurious, but must be free of overt distractions, such as combat raging nearby or other loud noises. Wizards also must have access to their spellbooks to study from and sufficient light to read them by. Okay. Preparation time, selection and preparation. Arcane magical writings. To record an arcane spell in written form, a character uses complex notation, blah, 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 blah. But yes. Borrowed spellbook, you can prepare a spell that she already knows and has recorded in her own spellbook, but preparation success is not assured. Adding spells to a spellbook. Pardon me. You can add spells to your book. Whenever you encounter a new spell, first decipher the magical writing from the other text. Next, the wizards must spend a day studying the spell. Then make a spellcraft check. Blah, 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 blah. Independent research is highlighted in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Writing a new spell in the spellbook. Time, space, materials and costs. Replacing and copying spellbooks. That's basically it. It goes into a lot of detail about when you are a wizard, you have a spell book. It is a book, it has magical writings, it goes into why the magical writings can't be copied down by absolutely everyone. It's basically trying to cover why everyone can't have a spellbook and why everyone doesn't have a spellbook. It's trying to introduce a fluff-based mechanic. And that's the thing to recognize. That is a fluff-based mechanic. And by fluff, I'm taking that from my mate Sean, who introduced me to the term fluff, where it is just the story, the narrative component. Now, fluff is just purely the story component. It has nothing to do with the actual gameplay at all. Fluff mechanics are mechanics that try to weave bits of the narrative in to explain themselves. Fluff-based mechanics. And then mechanics are just purely how the game functions, abstract of any narrative. That's how I'm terming things anyway. That's not like an official term at all. Let's see if it takes off. So that's 3rd edition. 3rd edition was Wizards of the Coast's first Dungeons & Dragons game that they released. And this was when they'd first acquired TSR, they rebranded and remade the whole thing and put it out there. And they made it well. I'm going to throw my hat over the wall and say 3rd edition was a well-made game. Fight me. So, 2nd edition, I also say is a well-made game. There is no perfect version of Dungeons & Dragons. Each of them have their own merits. I'm softening on 4th edition, mostly because of 5th edition. I love 5th edition. I think it's very good. I think it's a good way to introduce people to the game. 4th edition could have, but it suffers from fluff-based mechanics. And that's what I think is detriment. I think the fact that wizards are now stuck to just spell books as written in the books, and there's no suggestion of anything else, is a travesty. Here's what I mean. 2nd edition. So this is like 80-something, 90-something. This is the 11th printing, so this is from 1994, but 1989 is when this was written. So chapter 5 proficiencies, which is an optional chapter, a whole chapter on an optional mechanic. But yes, wizard. Here we go. Wizard was an actual group. So in 2nd edition, instead of having each class be entirely distinct, you had groups of classes, which is a fascinating concept. So wizards included mages, could do everything, and specialists, could do a little thing, but really well. By the same token, priests are amazing. Priests contained clerics and specialists. Druid being the example specialist given. But anyway, that's another video. Spellbooks. So, as you can see, they haven't separated the text into clear different sections. It is basically a wall of text until they get to something that they consider, this will be a good other section. So like in one paragraph that is not separated by space or anything, tells you about the spells or the tools, weapons and armor of the wizard. He is weak in toe-to-toe fight, but when prepared he can strike down, blah, 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 blah. And then the very next paragraph is wizards cannot wear any armor for several reasons. It goes into those. And it doesn't reiterate it later. So this is, again, fluff-based mechanics in the way that we might look at it now. But it was also the only mechanic. It was the only way to get to the mechanics. Whereas in 3rd edition, you had the fluff-based mechanics of how the spellbooks worked, and then you had, in the class section, the actual mechanics of like, okay, you need your spellbook to use it. You've got a section on arcane spells and armor. You also have a wizard starting package which details what's in your spellbook. But it does say that you begin the game with a spellbook. Whereabouts does it say you start with a spellbook? A wizard begins play with a spellbook containing all 0-level wizard spells plus 3 first-level spells of the player's choice. And that's in the spellbooks section of the class features section. So it's the spellbooks subsection of the class features section. It is separated out, and so you know that everything written in there will have a small amount of preamble fluff weaving into fluff-based mechanics, but then it will give you the mechanical information. 5th edition makes that even simpler by having the fluff, the preamble, and then completely separate in its own section, the facts. These are your hit dice. This is the equipment that you start off with. Choice of this or this, this or this, this or this. So you have 3 things, but it's a choice between these 6 things in these discrete groups. It tells you what abilities you can start off with. It's separated and clearly marked out. 2nd edition wasn't, which is one of the reasons why I think this has been so easily dropped as a concept. So allow me a moment to just quickly try and find... here we go. No, it starts way earlier. Wizards can use more magical items than other characters. Finally, all wizards can create new magical items, ranging from simple scrolls and potions to powerful staves and magic swords. Once he reaches 9th level, wizards can pen magical scrolls and brew potions. No matter what school of magic, blah 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 blah, use level 20. Learning and casting spells requires long study, patience, and research. Once his eventual life begins, Wizard is largely responsible for his own education. He no longer has a teacher looking over his shoulder. This freedom is not without its price, however. So here we go. Libraries, guilds, or captured books and scrolls to find new magical knowledge. You can try to read and understand the instructions on how to cast it. Wizard spellbook can be a single book, a set of books, a bundle of scrolls, or anything else your DM allows. This is page 30. I'll read again. A wizard spellbook can be a single book, a set of books, a bundle of scrolls, or anything else your DM allows. The spellbook is a wizard's diary, laboratory journal and encyclopedia containing a record of everything he knows. Naturally, it is his most treasured possession. Without it, he is almost helpless. So yes, anything that the DM allows. Now, later on, I believe it's in the priest section, but I won't waste your time looking at it. It mentions about massive stone temple walls and things containing magical writings. And from reading that in the second edition, it clarified to me some of the fluff-based mechanism behind spellbooks being spellbooks at all. I will elaborate a little further. Mutants and Masterminds by Green Ronin Publishing. This is based on the Open Gaming License, I believe. The D20 system allowance that Wizards of the Coast kind of gave out when they developed the Open Gaming License and system reference document. They allowed people to create products based on that information, and so Mutants and Masterminds came out of that. I think that Mutants and Masterminds has some very nice narrative mechanics, as in mechanics that help support a good narrative. It's really nice. The second edition is the only one I've played. I've heard good things about the third edition as well. In Mutants and Masterminds, you craft powers for your superhero, and what you do is you have just the bare bones mechanics, and you craft the narrative around it. So if you want any kind of ranged attack at all that does damage to your opponent, whether kind of subdual, try and knock them out damage, or lethal damage that's going to kill them, whether it is from a slingshot to a gun bullet to a nuke, blast. Just one power. Because in Mutants Masterminds, when creating your character, it's not about the story, it's about the mechanics. Like, what end result do you want? And you deconstruct that end result to get the building blocks that you need. And this system allows you to use those building blocks to progress forward from there. This is a game that I don't think would have fared well in the 70s. Possibly not the 80s either. This is a postmodern role-playing game. This is a deconstructivist dream right here. And I think that may in fact be part of why it hasn't become as big as Dungeons & Dragons, although it's still a very good system and quite popular. But it hasn't usurped Dungeons & Dragons in most gaming circles that I know of. Some of them do have other preferred systems that have usurped Dungeons & Dragons as like their go-to system. Some people like the Unisystem or World of Darkness or GURPS. So there are systems out there that do take Dungeons & Dragons' place as like the pinnacle one. And in fact, for some people, Dungeons & Dragons doesn't even rank on their lists, which is unfortunate. But I think it's due to things like this. The problems that I'm talking about. So if we were to create the spellbook for Mutants and Masterminds, well, strictly Mutants and Masterminds, I don't think we would. We would have the abilities that a character has, the spells, so to speak, as part of an array. And you could even have that set into a device for Mutants and Masterminds. So the device is a power which you put points into when you create your character, which then gives you more points out of it to spend on powers. But all those points, even though you've got more points for putting points in, all those points are linked to a device. And so if you lose that device, that's the risk. That's why you get more points for putting points in. You put in 5 points, you get like 8 points out or something like that. You are risking. You're putting forward that risk investment thing. So you're getting more from your investment because of the risk. That is essentially what a spellbook is. But note how it just calls it device. It is up to you to describe it. So the blast power, you describe it. You just write it down. So you could write down power level 2 blast, does 2 damage when it hits. Right, but what is it? Is it a slingshot? Is it a bullet from a gun? Is it a gun? Do you just throw guns at people? Is it a throwing knife? Is this an energy punch? Like you just punch and the air force flows after that? Is this like a mental blast? Are you like popping aneurysms in people's heads? That's all the blast power. All of it. Every single one of those is just the blast power, because mechanically it's the same thing. Much like in Dungeons and Dragons, weapons, especially melee weapons, they're all the same thing. All they do is a different damage dice. Mechanically, they do not function differently unless they have a special rule assigned to them. So, you could have a great sword, and if you would rather carry an axe, just talk to your dungeon master and say, I want this to look like an axe. Actually, in the mechanics of the game, it is not going to change a damn thing. It could be a talking squirrel, for all people care. It still does D8 or D10 slashing damage. I think D10 for something like a great sword. You know, that is what is going to be the end result. If you want a laughing squirrel that you swing around by the tail that does D10 damage, and no one at your table is going to be put off by that being a thing, that can be a thing. There's no reason why not, because there's nothing in the mechanics that says that it has to be a sheet of metal like this. Nothing at all. That is fluff and fluff-based mechanics. And Mutants and Masterminds taught me this. So combining the 2nd edition Player's Handbook, saying that it can be anything the DM wants, and a D20 based system that's based on the same thing that informed 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, saying that it doesn't matter what the thing is, so long as the end result is the same. So what do we know from Dungeons & Dragons? We know that the spellbook is just a repository of wizard knowledge. This is just where the spells go, and the fluff-based mechanics suggest that the wizard needs some time to access that information, and that information can leave again. And that is what I take as the core of it. This is where it gets a little difficult, because the more they rely on fluff-based mechanics like this, the harder it is to tease out what the important bits are. It being not in the middle of battle, not important. Okay? It being peace and quiet, not important. Okay? I'll get into why in a moment. But all of these other bits are not important. Here are some examples that I'm going to give to demonstrate why I think it's not important. Let's say that you want a battle wizard. You want a wizard who doesn't write things down in the spellbook. He Sherlock Holmes it. He has a mind palace where he stores things in, and it's kind of like a schizophrenic split. Now, schizophrenia is not multiple personality disorder. That's not what I'm describing. Schizophrenia is when you have either difficulty discerning between fantasy and reality, or you have a problem connecting bits of reality together in your brain. Excuse me, I'm going to have a drink of tea. So, we've got that sort of set up. So let's say this battle wizard, he enters a zen-like meditative state whenever the sounds of battle are around him, and he can then access this mind palace. So if he's in the middle of a raging battle for an hour, say, he can work his way through his mind palace in his own place and quietly like look through imaginary books. He could consult with imaginary ancient ancestors sat around in a zen-like garden just raking sand. You know, he could talk to these people and get things, or he could just in his own mind sit in a meditative state as he is in the real world, but in his mind he's in a quiet place, and in reality he's got war raging on all about him. The key things I see is that he's not to interact with the rest of the world while he's doing this. Okay? And then after, once he comes out of that, the ancestors have given him the right chi energy to power certain abilities which are going to manifest as spells, or he's gone through his mind powers and he's read through imaginary books to do all this stuff. And if it's just meditating in the thing, it's just he's deciding, okay, I want to be able to manipulate the forces of the universe to produce a fireball, so I'm gonna like grab a bit of like gunpowder grit in between my fingers and just kind of rub it there. Then when I want it, just go like that, and so you're mixing kind of alchemy and mysticism there. However you want to describe it, that doesn't matter, and that's the most freeing thing about it. So for our war wizard who needs battle raging on all about him, let's say your campaign world is in like an apocalyptic war setting where battle is raging on all the time, where the strict mechanics of a wizard might not fly. This war wizard can do so. And what's the important thing here? A thing that represents an investment risk. If the DM will never steal your spellbook, that isn't an investment risk. So if the spellbook is entirely in your character's mind, that represents the same amount of risk for a lot of DMs. But that doesn't mean it's out of reach. If you have a lot of psionics going on in the campaign, or a lot of enchantments going on in the campaign, a lot of charm spells, memory spells going on that can wipe someone's mind, break someone's connection to their ancestors, access to spells gone. And similarly, the ability to delve into someone else's mind allows you to start picking up their spells. It would also be a specialist thing to try and work out and understand how someone else's brain works, for you to understand the different processes and hormones that need to pass through particular neurons at what time to trigger the certain types of neural responses that produce the effect that the spell makes. That's complicated, and just as complicated as arcane magical writings. And this is why spellbooks, for me, for wizards, in any version of Dungeons & Dragons, don't have to be spellbooks. It could be a piece of leather. Okay, just a rectangular piece of leather, and every day you just tear off a strip. And that's it. And you tear off a strip after like an hour-long ritual of doing something, I don't know, picking your toenails, I don't know. Right? And the strip gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, but it represents, it's like tying a knot in a piece of string. It represents you memorizing a process in your mind and just understanding the general entropy of the universe represented by a leather strip getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then when it completely disappears, just get a new leather strip if you want to. I mean, that's a very abstract, weird concept. And not quite as well put together as the War Wizard thing, but it's still something you can do. Now, I'm getting a phone call. I will pick up that phone call now. My apologies, everyone. That was my wife calling. I thought I'd pick up the phone. It's only polite. So where was I? I was mid-rant. I was mid-flow. But yeah, so in my play-by-post campaign is an idea for Wizard Spellbooks I've been toying with for a little while. For quite a while, in fact. And that campaign world I will go into in another video. Probably a few videos, because there are parts of the campaign world I love. It's why I built the campaign world the way that I did, because these are ideas and concepts that I love so much, and I love taking ideas apart and putting them back together again in new and interesting ways, and not just, oh, let's have a kobold riding a warg. Like, those are good and fun, interesting things, and it's things that I think the majority of dungeon masters should be already exploring. And it's things that I went straight to as a kid. This kind of mashing up of things. So that's kind of why I'm doing videos the way that I am now. I'm not getting the stimulation that I need, because I've already done all the things that all these other channels are talking about, and this is why I'm doing this now. So the spell book doesn't need to be a physical thing. We've established this. It doesn't need to be a physical thing. You can represent all the same risk and investment in other things and not it have to be a physical object. So let's bring it back to a physical object. What fun physical objects can we have? Now that we know that we don't need it to be a physical object, we can have anything. Imagine a world where magic, high magic, exists in a medieval feudal European setting. Castles are useless. If you've got someone who can travel for hundreds of miles with an army and a full caravan of supplies and set out the ability to melt stone walls in minutes. Like, it just takes him an hour to prepare, surrounded by loads of soldiers. He's not getting taken out anytime soon. And then, again, surrounded by a phalanx of people with shields. He just kind of looks through a slit and goes, boom! Walls gone. Kingdoms would crumble the moment anyone tried to step to any kingdom. So you would either end up with like one massive kingdom, or you'd end up with loads of little kingdoms popping up all the time and taking over each other, and then someone else coming and taking over them. Or you just have a complete redesign of all architecture, and magic would be like the main currency because you want anti-magic fields and magical protections for all of your castles, which is fine. But let's say you wanted to portray a world where this sort of magic has just started becoming seen as a resource to be used in this way. Okay? People don't immediately go, we can split the atom. We have nukes. No, there's a development process to these things. There's a thought process to these things. So, whenever people advance technology or advance society in any way, it is not a straight line that immediately starts at one end and ends at the other straight away. We didn't go from electricity to television. We had electricity for centuries before television. But what does television need? It needs electricity. There are other technologies like cathode ray tube, forms of radio transmission that we needed to develop, but they're all based on electricity. These are all just passing electricity through a thing shaped a certain way to do a thing. Same with magic. If you could discover that you could melt stone with magic, your mind wouldn't necessarily go straight to, I can melt castle walls and take over kingdoms now. And if it did, you wouldn't immediately take over all kingdoms. There would be like armies amassed to protect against you. People would start improvising things, start erecting like wood or metal walls and just things to get around. So it would be a process. Game of Thrones. Daenerys Targaryen has 3 dragons. Has she taken over all the kingdoms yet? No. She's got 3 dragons. That doesn't mean that all the kingdoms are just going to immediately bow down and go, there's no point. You know, people fight. It takes time to get from a place to another place and to do things. And the motivation isn't necessarily there all the time, which is why you get fiction with evil versions of characters. The Injustice series of computer games. You've got Superman as an evil despot taking over the world. Evil's eradicated. Evil is eradicated. Basically, people that disagree with Superman. But of course, Superman has changed his mind at this point. Something has happened to force him to change. But nothing new has been introduced. Lois has been killed and taken away. Something personal to him has been taken away. Other people have died before. The writers just decided that this would be a good idea to explore what an evil Superman would be like. But all the pieces are there in the more mainstream interpretation of Superman. So in the main series of comic books, in the films and everything, those situations haven't come about. But they're just situations. They can come about. Same thing with magic and technology. It's just we haven't got there yet. Magical aliens haven't come to give us new things and suddenly we have Wi-Fi. No, we just, over slow decades of innovation and slow improvements and minor improvements, we get better and better and better. It's evolution. Same with magic, okay? The moment you can melt things, you might think, I can create mountain passes, and I'll spend all my days creating mountain passes to make trade easier. Not even thinking that, I can now melt castle walls. You know, it might just not occur to them. So, let's say we want to have a world where that thought has occurred, and we want a really cool thing for magic to be anchored to. So we don't want like a mind palace, we don't want a book, but we want to slow down the march of magical progress. Massive stone obelisks. In the campaign that I'm running, play by post, I call it the Tehun campaign, which is after the gods that I created. I created the Tehun gods for a different campaign, and several elements, including the gnomes and their civilization and the attitudes of the elves and things, I've kind of drawn from that campaign and put into this new campaign. So I like recycling things if they work. And this is something that I didn't have in the old campaign, but that I'm bringing into this one, mostly because I think that improvements can be made in how we think about role-playing games. So we can have massive stone crystalline obelisks. We can have huge crystal structures growing in caves, and these are just hubs for magical energy of some kind. In my campaign, it's something more specific, but this is just as a generic, it's a hub of magical energy. So a wizard finds this, and they can now store their spells inside. Just by arranging magic wires in a certain way. It's like storing it in a crystal computer. You just store your spell ideas in this, and then when you want them again, you draw them out. You meditate with it. You tap on the walls in Morse code or something. You get the spells back out. It's me being fairly flippant about it. No, like, put your hand on, take a nice deep breath and feel the energy flowing into you, and treat it like the force or spiritual energy or whatever, or as a specific like weave or arcane matrix type thing, and that can be where the spells are stored. This introduces the element of finding others. You could go diving into caves, which encourages adventuring to go and find these crystalline structures. Diving into the Underdark would be a treasure trove of this sort of thing, if you go with the stereotypical Underdark thing. So just going underground at all to where crystals grow. You would have kings and court wizards with crystal cut things like dangling from ceilings that might want to get stolen by thieves and things. That might be their thing. This could explain why you've got small crystals on like wands or staves. Why crystals are about all the place, because they're a hub of magical energy. Any like diamond ring that you find might be magical, and it could be that a small shard of crystal doesn't work the same as a spell book, but can store a single magical effect. And if cut the right way and worked the right way, it can keep that magical effect permanently. And thus you've got like dual insets for magic weapons, for magic rings, for amulets. A belt of giant strength could just be a cut of a crystal from a giant landscape, where it's just kind of absorbed the general vibe of giants being strong, because that's the spiritual energy, their culture. And so you just get a barbaric giant crystal, stick it into a belt, and all of a sudden that just infuses whoever wears that belt with this magical energy. There's so much potential for something like that, and narratively you can make it fit together like that. So you can have crystals be like the main focus of the campaign, where the trade in crystals, you could have mundane crystals being passed off as magical ones, and that be a thing. Like, not a big thing, but have that as like as one of the downtime activities in the new 5e thing. It's like, oh, you get foiled by something. Add that to the list, where you go shopping for magical crystals and you find that someone's trying to pass off mundane, non-magical crystals as magical. Or where you've got someone buying a mundane, non-magical crystal that was sold as a mundane, non-magical crystal, and then getting upset at the shopkeeper for it being a mundane, non-magical crystal. It was sold to you on that basis. Just introduce some drama into your games, man. Just try things out. And if they don't work, that game's going to end in a year or so, or sooner anyway. You're not going to play the same campaign forever. There are these wonderful stories of people playing campaigns for years and years and years. The more modern versions of role-playing games are not designed around that idea that you will be playing a character for your whole life. And the people that started playing role-playing games, they're still alive. It was only the late 70s So people saying, oh, I've played the same character for all my lives, we started hearing that around the 90s. They had been playing these games for about 10 years. So it's not a lifelong thing to have one character all the way through your entire life. It may seem that way when you hear other people talk about these things, but that's not the way that it actually worked. You know, it was late 70s when D&D came out, so early 90s, it would have been about 10 years that people had been playing the game, if they were like early converts. Just over 10 years if they were like immediate converts to playing it. But if they started playing in like the 80s when the boom happened, no, these fanciful stories we heard, or rather I heard, in the 90s and early noughties of people having played the same character for years and for their whole lives and taking them on these epic journeys. These epic journeys hadn't taken that long, actually. Some people will have played World of Warcraft characters for longer. So, if something doesn't work, you can abandon it, you can change it, you can all agree to retcon it, or you can just take off and nuke the site from orbit, it's the only way to be sure, and just start a new game. And just do it with something different. But just try something new, please. Please, just go out there and try something new and interesting. Start a new wizard character and talk to your DM and say, I don't want a spell book. I want my familiar to be my spiritual companion. And between the two of us, we rearrange the stars of the universe. And it's when we meditate on those stars, that's where we get our magical power from. And the DM can just go, yeah. And it might not be that you're actually moving the stars of the universe. It could be that you're just interpreting the stars. It's some kind of medieval astrology where you're barely understanding things, but you have magical power and you can call upon it whenever you want, but you've got like some mental gymnastics that this person has to go through to produce that effect, where they feel like they have to study the stars to be able to access this magical power. And it's actually within them all along. And the thing is, in the game, you never need to address that. You may know that that's the case. You may know that they're not actually creating star constellations in the sky. But they still think that they are. And it's not going to be like someone points this out and their whole personality comes crumbling down and they don't know what they're going to do. If you want to do that story, you can do. But if you just want standard dungeon excitement and you don't want to do carting a book around, but you still want something cool and epic to share around the table at the inn, or be able to tell other people that, actually in my game, my DM let me rearrange the stars of the universe. Doesn't really rearrange them, but that's what my character thinks. It's interesting. It's cool. Do it. I mean, just... I get so excited about these things, and I'm despairing at the imagined person watching this who doesn't do this, has never done this, has never thought of doing this, and upon watching this video has gone, like, just, dude, come on, try something fun and amazing. So this has been about wizard spellbooks. You can do this with everything. And it is still D&D. It is still Dungeons & Dragons. It is still a role-playing game. You're still in a fantasy setting. If you wanted to try this in a different setting, by all means. But in a fantasy setting, in your typical Dungeons & Dragons setting, where you're dealing with sort of medieval era, so like from 1200s to like 1600s at a push, sort of European or Eurocentric style of like architecture and culture and combat warfare, that sort of thing. When you're dealing with that kind of fantasy setting, allowing minor changes like the ones that I've proposed can radically alter everything. And they cannot radically alter everything. Do you think a fighter's going to be bothered how a wizard gets his spells? No. Is he going to be bothered that he can find a crystal in the deep dark dungeons and shove it into a sword hilt and all of a sudden it shoots lightning? Yeah. You know, but by the same token, in another campaign world where they haven't thought about this, they just take everything from the books as read, and it's like, okay, there are swords that exist that shoot lightning, and wizards get spells from spell books. This is just how things are. I'm not going to think about how the world would react to these things and interweave it and stuff. It will just be bland. Here's a thing, stick it on top of another thing, let's carry on with the story. Then you might still get a fighter that goes, there are lightning shooting swords out there. I want one of those. From other players' and characters' perspectives, it's not going to impact things. At least certainly not in a negative way. It might enrich the story. It might give other characters a way to interact with other characters. They can interact with each other in new ways that they didn't think that they could. If all of a sudden the way a wizard gets more spells and becomes more powerful is the same way that other classes can get more powers and become more powerful. Let's say that they are spirit crystals. Let's stick with the crystal theme here. A barbarian could commune with his ancestors through spirit crystals. A wizard can gain spells through spirit crystals. The gods themselves could communicate through other spirit crystals, or the same spirit crystal. So arcane and divine energy is just how you apply it rather than where it comes from. Warlocks could gather these crystals up and want to offer them to their patron, so the patron becomes more powerful and just goes, magical power. So everyone now has a reason to go diving into dungeons, killing other creatures for these really powerful artifacts. And that's now a thing. It's not just you're going and killing things that are in your way and adjacent to another thing. They are in possession of it. They are political adversaries. All of a sudden now, an orc warband down in a cave, picking up these other crystals and things, are amassing power. They are a legitimate political threat to the kingdom that you've just come from. And unless you can broker a deal with these orcs, or slaughter them and steal the crystals to better the power of the kingdom that you've just come from, or yourselves as independent agents, then that's going to represent a problem in the world that the players might need to deal with later. Very small, simple tweaks can really enhance your game playing experience. They can really enhance how you interact with the texts of these games. Not just the books, but the actual game playing experience itself. By recognizing what is a mechanical component, and what is a narrative component, and what is a narrative component masquerading as a mechanical component. One of these fluff-cum mechanical entries. Recognizing those and seeing what's important about them. What is the game designer trying to achieve here? Deconstructing that idea and just taking that as your basis. And then allowing anything to happen. Just throw ideas and see if they fit. If you struggle to start with an idea and see what imagination spokes come off of that, instead try boiling it down to these individual components. It's like, okay, they want some kind of criteria for spells to be concentrated on, so they say peace and quiet. It could be loud noises all the time. It could be that they need to be submerged in water for an hour and they just happen to be able to hold their breath while concentrating on spells. It's like some magical energy thing. Just whatever. So it's not something they can abuse outside of that mechanic. It can be anything. Anything at all. And that's the important thing. It's a thing, a trigger to allow them to access an ability that has some element of risk connected to how it's accessed. So a way of accessing it that can be taken away. If that's what you manage to boil it down to, and you don't immediately start thinking of other things, think of a thing and throw it and see if it sticks. See if it fits. If you suddenly think of, let's try keyboard teacup. Keyboard teacup. How does that fit with this? Needing to drink a special type of tea and needing to write something down. Does that fit with this? Yeah, it's a ritual, it's a thing to do, and needing to write something down. Maybe every single day you need to grab some charcoal and slowly paint on the magical symbols of what you're casting that day, and that is you selecting your spells. It's not that you have a book, it's just you've remembered all these different magical sigils and putting them in a certain order, in a certain way, gives you these magical powers. And the better you get, the more you're able to weave symbols into symbols and fit more symbols on just by practice, and that represents the expanding spell slots that you get. And needing to drink like a herbal tea throughout this ritual of painting these symbols onto you just represents that need for peace and quiet and a ritual setting to do something in. I mean, that is like some sort of wushu invocation specialist. If you wanted to be an invoker wizard, specialist wizard, just ace at shooting fireballs and firing up wind walls and being like some elemental master, that as an alternative to spellbooks would be amazing. You don't want to wear armor, so as a wizard, just go shirtless. Just paint symbols on. Look like a woad-covered Celtic warrior, but a magic one. See what I mean? To just throwing ideas and seeing what comes up. That is the magic of D&D that I think, unfortunately, has been lost since TSR. TSR tried to provide a framework for people to hang their imagination on if they struggled at first, a way to introduce them to it, and then made it explicit from the get-go that you can change things, and that it's basically whatever you and your Dungeon Master agree upon, whatever the two of you get together and decide, that's what I want, that's the cool thing that I want. And that, I think, has been lost. People have tried to genericize the game Dungeons and Dragons a bit too much. They've tried to make it go, okay, well, here is the basic thing. If you want something else, we'll make it as a separate thing. So, specifically, like a samurai warrior, if you wanted like an oriental theme to your campaign and you wanted to introduce some Chinese and Japanese elements to your medieval setting, instead of needing to create whole new character classes, you could just reflavor the ones that are already there. It's one of the reasons why in the second edition they're so broad and so generic. Just the mechanics of them. It's so that the narrative can be whatever you want it to be. With later editions, like 5th edition, I think that while things like spellbooks and things can certainly be altered a little bit, if you wanted to go for a very specific idea rather than trying to mold an idea around the mechanics, if you wanted to come up with the idea first and mold the mechanics around this idea, you might find bits that don't quite fit as standard, and so you need to start messing with the mechanics, and that'll be something that I'll talk about in a different video. For now, I'm going to sign off because it's been nearly an hour and I've rambled on and I've had not nearly as much tea as I wanted and my throat's getting dry, so I will let you all go. But thank you for listening to me ramble, and I hope you all got something from this. I know it's been an hour of me just talking about a wizard's spellbook, and it's probably not been that interesting, but I have enjoyed talking about it. I hope you accept my evidence for why I've come up with the way that I want to approach things like this. And if you do have any questions at all of why to do something a certain way, if you want help in trying to craft a narrative around an idea that you've got, I can be there to help. Just get in touch. I do this a lot. There's the campaign that I'm running Play by Post. There are so many disparate character ideas that are just so far removed from one another that you might not think that they can all exist in the world together. But that's what the Avengers are for, man. That is a good example of where you can have one tone and theme to one character and another tone and theme to another character, and when you combine them together you have a different tone and theme for the fact that they are working together, but they're still the same characters and they can still behave in roughly the same way. That again is another video for another time. So yeah, if you want help in trying to make something fit, I can help with deconstructing the mechanics or helping to explain a certain thing. I am not an authority. I have not made a game. I have done some game consulting. I have consulted on the design of a couple of games now. I've got almost 2 decades of gaming experience under my belt. I started DMing when I was 11, and I'm 29 now, as my wife keeps reminding me. So, for 18 years I have been running games of Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. And I've been doing that and Warhammer since before then, and just I have a lot to bring to the table, as well as my acting experience and my film studies that I've been doing in media and marketing, and just how things interact in content. It's just, I feel like a lot of the experience that I've had has helped to shape how I look at things, and I think that my perspective is useful. So if you want more of my perspective, just get in touch. If you don't, then thanks for stopping by and listening to me ramble for 55 minutes. Haha, sucker, you don't want my services now, do you? Services. My services are free, by the way. I know. I feel a lot more free to discuss talking about things outside of the videos now that I'm not thinking about this as a business. So yeah, it's more of just like a friendly thing. Seriously, if you want to chat, I'm here to chat. I will make more videos later. Bye. And just go watch another video.